Okay, my clock says 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. For all of you that are on, we don't want to keep you, and we thank you for joining us on time. I want to welcome you to Customizing Your Chat Device Part 1. We will have Part 2 next week. I am Courtney Mayholtz. I am a speech pathologist and the assistive technology consultant here in the state of Georgia. I have been working as an SLP for about 10 years now, with 8 of those years being in the field of AAC. And I've worked in a variety of settings. I started my career in the hospitals and adult rehabilitation. I have worked in private clinics with the pediatric populations, as well as working in the school with children and young adults, so middle school, high schoolers, and even kids a little bit older. And I hope to use all of that experience and bring that to the training today to give you some really good tips and information on how to customize your device so that it will be successful for your users. So let's go ahead and get started. Just a little bit of housekeeping info. If you've never used GoToMeeting before, so you do have this control panel that pops up usually on the right side of your screen there. You are able to either expand or shrink that so that you can see more of the screen. In a few slides, I am going to split my screen so that you can see my document camera and my device. So you might want to be able to see more of the screen when I do that. We do have everybody muted for this presentation just to cut down on some of the background noise and distractions. We know you guys aren't always in control of what's happening in the background, so we don't want to distract anybody. If you do have a question, though, there is a chat window, so you'll see this little chat box, or you'll be able to expand your chat window where you can ask questions. We definitely want you to ask questions at any time during the training today. I will be monitoring the chat window, and then I also have a co-organizer with me. Kim is marked as our Saltillo Corporation. She's going to help me monitor that window to make sure that we get all of your questions answered. So please do feel free to type in those questions anytime they come up. And then the other section I want to mention is the materials section. So if you are an SLP looking for credit for this class, you're going to find those documents in the materials section where you can download those and you'll be able to submit them to us with email. And also I want to make sure everybody's aware that there's a handout in that section that you might want to download, and it has all of the information that we're going to talk about today. So we don't share any of our slides because we do want to keep up with the most up-to-date features and the most up-to-date research. And so we're constantly changing our slides. And so instead of doing slides, we do have a handout that's pretty comprehensive and includes all of the information that we talk about today. So make sure you download that. As I mentioned, this is being offered for 1 hour of continuing education credit with ASHA. And because of that, I do need to go over these disclosures. So we are only going to focus on Saltillo products today. That's the name of our training, right? Customizing your chat device. We're not going to include information on any other or similar products. And disclosures, I am an employee owner of Saltillo Corporation. I need to let you know that financially. And then non-financially, I am a member of ASHA as well as ASHA SIG 12, which is the special interest group for alternative and augmentative communication. Again, you will receive 1 hour of continuing education, or 0.1 ASHA CEUs. And we do ask that you submit your participation form within 15 days and include the date of today's training. So your name and all of your information. Don't worry about the course number or anything. We will fill that out as long as you give us the date of the training on your participation form. You do have to be present in order to receive the credit for the entire hour. We don't offer any partial credit, and go-to training is time-stamped so that if you were audited or we were audited, we can ensure that you were in the training for the full hour and received the appropriate amount of credit. So we're going to throw up a little poll here. I just want to know who my audience is today. If you guys are speech therapists, parents, teachers, everybody on the team is welcome, and you guys are all as equally as important, but it might help me tailor my information a little bit so that I can give you some better information. So we have some SLPs so far. I'm going to give you guys a few more seconds to answer. Okay, well, so we have mostly SLPs today, which is unusual for me. I think that's the first. At least the people who answered only said they were SLPs. Anyways, on our agenda today, we are going to cover two sort of categories regarding our device. So we're going to talk a lot today about customizing our settings, and those are things that are directly on the device. So the way we access the device, the voices on the device, all of these different things that we see listed here. And then at the end, we will have a sort of introduction to how we customize vocabulary and sort of the basics of customizing. Next week, the part 2 training is much more in-depth and more advanced edits and changes that you can make to the device and the vocabulary. So if you haven't registered for that one, come back next week. As we go through the training today, we're going to be using this ready, fire, aim approach. And that it's a business strategy that was developed by Michael Masterson, but really the idea behind it is that we want to make sure that we're always thinking about why we want to modify features on the device. We need to have a plan. Otherwise, our device is going to end up looking something like this dartboard here, where we have very few hits and might have lots of holes, and our device might look like a big old mess. So instead, we want you guys to all hit a bullseye today. So as we go through the technical information, we're going to be making sure that we think about why we are going to be changing or customizing the device in a certain way so that it's meaningful and functional to help our client and be the most successful as possible. So whenever you see this little guy here with the dart aiming, we're going to be talking about some different functional reasons. Sorry, it seems some of our attendees are having some technical difficulties, so we want to make sure everybody can hear. But let's go ahead as we work through that. We'll go ahead and get started, and we'll talk about our chat hardware menus. So right now would be a great time, if you have a device, go ahead and pull it out as we go through these different things. And I'm going to split my screen here so you can see my device. There we go. And you won't have all of the buttons that we have listed on our slide here. My device doesn't have all of the buttons. In fact, that first one is going to be the magnifying glass. You can see if I slide my device over a little bit, I don't have that magnifying glass. If you do see that on your device, it just means that you're have one of our older devices, and that magnifying button does have a couple functions. So it can stop the speech on your device, and if you press and hold, it will reconnect to your Bluetooth amplifier. Most of the devices, all of the devices, should have this back button. Again, it might look a little bit different, whether or not it's that triangle or that U-turn kind of arrow. On my device, it's that U-turn arrow right there. And it does, if I navigate to a page, it will let me go back a page. The next button is the home button. Mine is this home button, is this button here in the middle. It has a couple different functions. It does let you navigate out of the chat software when you have it set up to do so, or it also will, if your device is set to sleep, it will wake up your screen as well, rather than having to push that power button all the time. And again, it could look like a circle or just that little home. The next one is the recent apps. So I know it looks like I have a recent apps button, but that's not what this is on my device. If you have that on your device, a recent apps button, it's similar to our phone function where you'll be able to view the most recent apps that you've used and closed them. Instead, this little button on my device is actually my menu button. So the last item on our list here, and this is the one that has the most variability for sure. But when you push that menu button, it will bring up a pop-up menu of all of your different menus and libraries and settings that you can go into. So let's talk a little bit about the menu, and I'm going to go ahead and reposition my device so you guys can see the screen and everything looks good. When you do push that menu button, the very first thing that pops up is your menu bar. This is what most of the devices look like in the default settings with just these 4 options. So the first option is going to be edit mode. This is where you can turn editing on and off, and you would go into edit mode to make any changes to your vocabulary. Your settings are going to be where you can modify device settings. Again, the device settings are all the things about the device, the voice, how we access the device, all the different features that can be turned on and off. Most of those are going to be found in the settings. The library is where you will find all of the different vocabulary files that are available on the devices. There are over 30 vocabulary files on all of our devices set as the default. And so that's where you would find all those. And then in the help section is where you can find your system information and registration. You're also going to be able to find what version of the software you're currently on. You can also check for updates and update your device in that section as well. On my slide here, you can see the last 2 options are optional, this word finder and lock. And we're going to go over today how we can add those to our device. So let's jump into customizing our settings. So I've already pushed my menu button, that's the first step. My second step is to go into settings. And then that brings me to this home menu of my settings on my device. And the first section that I want to talk about today is input. So input is the very first choice on your menu, and that takes you to all of the different input actions. So input is how we select buttons on the device, or how we touch, or how we make the device work. I do want to quickly mention that if you scroll down in your input settings, you will see alternative access here. So all of our NovaChats and Chat Fusions have the ability to use switches for scanning. And if you have a Chat Fusion device, as my slide says, you can also use head pointing on a Chat Fusion device. We're not going to cover any of these input settings today. That's a much longer training, and we just wouldn't have enough time to go into that. But I do want you guys to be aware that that's where you can find all of that, those settings to change how we input the device. So the first thing we're going to talk about is button timing. So let's go into our timing menu, and we have 3 options. And you can adjust these different button timing actions based on your client's needs. The first one is acceptance time. What acceptance time does is, as it says here, there's a length of time that's required to hold a button before it will register. So in other words, if we go in and we enable that, we can then set a different time, So we can set it for 1.5 seconds. That's what it's currently at. Let me show you that menu a little bit clearer. Or you could play around with, 2.5 seconds. Excuse me. You can make it longer. That's a really long time. So maybe we'll leave it at 1.5 seconds. But what that does is if I go, I'm going to hit my back button all the way out to my vocabulary and show you what that does. And so when I push a button now, it won't register, or it won't say anything until I push and hold for that 1.5 seconds.
Go.
And now it says the word. You have to push it for at least 1.5 seconds. That is how we have currently set that to work. Now, some of my teams use that as a way to avoid some of this behavior, where we call it maybe this self-stimulatory behavior, where we just want to hear a word over and over again. But I sometimes caution teams about using acceptance time for this, because how would you feel if you had to wait 1 second or 2 seconds between every single word that you said? And that can be a little frustrating, and we might not get a lot of engagement for kids. Now, certainly there are some times where I've seen this used appropriately. Some kids do have some motor control issues, and they do these light sort of double taps, so teaching them to push and hold for a little bit longer might be a good solution for them. So you definitely need to make that choice based on what is appropriate. So let's go back into our input and our timing. I'm going to go ahead and turn off acceptance time, and we'll talk about the next option, which was release time. What release time does is it allows you to, it will accept your first push, so I can say go, but then there's sort of this buffer time, this required wait time between the next button that I can push. So this is sometimes a better solution for my teams. So I'm just going to enable that. Where we do have a concern about some self-stimulatory behavior, where we can accept that first push. Let me just show you. You can again play with the time. I find for most of my teams here that it's anywhere between half a second or 1 second, 1 full second is a good time. So I'm going to leave it at 0.7 seconds, okay? And I'll show you what this does. Let me brighten this back up, and I'll come out of the vocabulary to the vocabulary. Whoa, what just happened? My apologies. Okay, there we go. And let's go back out to our vocabulary, and I'll make that menu go away. So now you can see, I'm going to clear that. So I'm going to do like this time. So I can say I like it, but I can't say like. I have to wait 0.7 seconds before it will say my next word, and it didn't talk for me that time. So I usually tell my teams, if we are functionally using the device, you have to generally, if you're functionally using that device, that 0.7 seconds is a good time. So if I say go away, then I can generally communicate my messages, and it won't impact me in any way. All right, so let's go back. I'm going to go into our menu. There's one more timing setting to talk about. So settings, input, and then timing again. The last one I'll talk about is activate on release. And let me just quickly turn off our release time. But activate on release is set to be turned on default on the devices, and it's a great feature for kids who have some motor impairments. I tend to think of kids with CP, cerebral palsy, for this feature, that if we're kind of reaching for that word good, but we get tired halfway and we land on get, I can still move my finger and my device is not going to talk until I let go of that word. So good. Now it will say good. If we had that turned off, it would just accept whatever that first push, whatever the first push button was that you landed on. All right, so next is going to be our beep on button press. Beep on button press, I'm going to go back into my menu and settings and input. Now I have my beep on button press turned on already, and you may have heard, but when I touch each button, it gives me a little sort of dink, a little clink to let me know that I've actually pressed a button. And so it's a nice audio cue or prompt for users that might need a little bit more input to let them know that they're selecting buttons. It is hard to hear when you're selecting buttons that talk, so I'm going to show you what that sounds like. Stop. Yeah, it's hard to hear that, but if I select a button that doesn't talk, you're going to be able to hear it much better. So you hear that little clink, clink, and that's giving me just that input that I am selecting a button. Button press draw is another great feature to give me more input. So if I'm going to my menu and my settings and input, I'm going to, now you might have a newer software version, and mine is the most up-to-date software version. This is what I was saying, and the reason we don't give out our slides is because now the feature is called button press draw. You want to just make sure that if you see button press draw, that you are set to normal, as it says here. Okay. If you have an older software version where yours says draw button press, like on my slide, you just need to check to make sure that it's enabled. And the other thing you need to do for this feature to work is you need to go back one menu. So I'm going to go back to my main input, and we go to Style, and we're going to scroll down under this gradient fill. You're going to turn that off, disable that. That is a set to be turned on as a default feature. So when we turn that off, now what happens when I push a button is my button turns red. So it's a nice visual cue that I am pushing that button. So I can use, I can get some audio cues and I can get some visual cues as well. The next feature that I change in that input menu, so I'm going to go to my menu, settings, and input. And this is something that I change for all of my devices, is the tilt options. The standard devices are set to have that auto orientation change similar to our phones. The picture will flip or the video will flip as the orientation of the phone changes. But I generally recommend that we go in and we set that to have no action. So that way your buttons always look the same. They're always in the same place. And this is really important if you're using a key guard. You want your buttons to always line up. So setting it to take no action, and then the default orientation should automatically be landscape on the device. Okay. So I would do that for all devices. Again, so yes, take no action, and then it will be landscape. So let's go into our next menu. So I'm back to my main settings menu here, where input is my first option. And the next feature that we're going to talk about is speech output. So speech output is all things voice related. So this is where we get all of our voices, and we can personalize things there. So you can indicate how often you want your device, the voice output, to communicate. I have selected mine to communicate every character, so every time I press a letter on my keyboard, which can be really great if we're working on literacy or phonics skills or identifying letters. Every word, so as I'm composing my message, my listener knows that I am in the process of answering them, and my device is speaking after every word. And then after every sentence, if I'm using the punctuation, so the period, the exclamation point, the question mark, when you use any of that grammar, then your sentence, your complete sentence is going to be spoken. And again, I like to model that on my devices, the use of grammar. It supports literacy and just this idea of, complete thoughts. So I always have my sentence feature enabled. The other cool thing with the grammar is if you have auto clear enabled, and that is default on the devices, that your auto clear is enabled, what it does is when I say a whole message, so
I like it.
So that it spoke after every word, and now I'm going to use my period.
I like it.
It spoke my complete sentence. And now if I say a new sentence,
do,
it erased my last sentence for me. So that's smart grammar.
Like it.
And it will
do you like it?
It will just continuously do that. If you turn that auto clear off, you're able to have multiple sentences in that message window if you wanted that. Okay, let's talk about our voices. So I'm going to go to my menu, settings, and speech output. And then I'm going to go to voice. Now there are two synthesizers on our devices available. And the Ivona synthesizer is the standard synthesizer. So that comes on all of our devices. So I'm going to start with Ivona. Okay. When you do, and I'm going to leave my screen a little dark because we're going to have some pop-up menus here. So the next place we're going to go is the voice settings, which is right under the synthesizer. And when I go into voice settings, this is where I am able to pick out my actual voices. So voice settings, and then you get to this screen. If you click this gray bar, it's a drop-down box of all the different voices that are available for you within that synthesizer. So in Ivana, you have 7 US English voices that are available, several male voices, several female voices, and you're able to then pick whichever voice you want. So I currently have Sally. And then you can adjust and personalize the voice by changing the rate of the speech. Okay, so you could toggle this up or down and test it and then make any changes that you want. So I'm just going to go ahead and save my voice there. If you're using, I'm going to go to the acapella synthesizer. If you don't see acapella on your device, that's because your SLP didn't recommend it because it is an additional purchase. So it just means that you don't have access to those voices. Acapella has, I think it's about 15 US English voices, so you get a lot more choices on your voice. And then you also can adjust the pitch and the rate separately on the acapella synthesizer. Whenever one of my clients got a device, the very first thing that we did was we would sit down and listen to all the voices. I let the child pick their voice because we really do want to encourage this is going to be their voice and their way to communicate with us. So if they, laughed at a voice or they told me they liked it, then that was the voice we went with. Anything to get a little bit more engagement and buy-in on the device. So the other thing that we'll mention in our voice menu is going to be our pronunciation. So let me go back one page. So if you're in your speech output menu here, as the slide says, and you're in your voice, so we're in speech output and then we go to voice, you have pronunciations available. Click on pronunciations and that brings you to this list of all the pronunciations that are available in the device or that are currently programmed in there. And if you want to add a new one, you're going to hit your menu button and then new. So there's the new at the bottom. And that brings you to this screen. Now this is really important. The reason we want to add pronunciations is for any person's name. Okay, so my last name is pronounced Mayholtz, but it doesn't look like that. It looks like it's pronounced Maholtz. So I would definitely add that into your devices. I had a child, one friend's name was Agabus, so we had to put his name in there because the spelling was very different from how it was actually pronounced. So once you put in that pronounce box, you're going to put or spell correctly the word, the name. And then in the pronounce as box, you're going to play around with the pronunciation. So here I can make it say May Holtz. And then you can always test your pronunciation to make sure it sounds good.
Mayholtz.
So I could even play around more if I wanted adding a space or anything like that. Once you're happy with that, you're just going to go ahead and save, and now your pronunciation is added to the list. So anytime any of the vocabularies see this word, or any of the buttons have this word written on it, it's going to be pronounced the way that we have told the device to say it. All right, next up is the style. So let's go back to our main menu. And style is a few down from our speech output. So when we go into style, the very first section of things that we can change is customizing the speech display bar. Now for all of my clients, I automatically go into the font and I change the font size because the default is set to be like 12, which is really, really tiny. So you can see here, I have my font size set to be 24. So you can play around. Again, you can, just increase it there, or you can, if you want to, go ahead and just touch the box and it will let you type in whatever number that you want. I also, as a personal preference, let me brighten my screen back up for you, have my words set to be bold. Again, just a personal preference, but you can see the words in my speech display bar. I like that they're really big and bold so that everybody can see them. And so that was changing the font size. You definitely want to change your font size if you're using a key guard. Let me go back to my style menu quickly. If you're using a key guard, you definitely want to change your font size, and that is what is going to allow the grid on your key guard to match up with the buttons on your device. And in fact, on our new key guards, if you flip them over, it will say something like word power 60, and then it should say like font size or font point, and it tells you what number you need to make your font size in order to match up with your key guard. All right, the next thing that we will talk about is changing the color of the speech display bar. So currently our background color is set to be white. But if we have a client that needs high contrast, so a client with maybe CVI or some other vision impairment, we might need that to be a black background. So you can change it to be black. And then right now it's telling me that my font color and my background color are the same. So it's giving me a little warning that I'm not going to be able to see anything unless I change one of those. So then I'm going to go ahead and change my text color, and I'm going to choose a nice bright yellow so that I have a really good contrast now in my speech display bar. So that might be helpful for some of our users with visual impairments. The next feature that I want to show is the show button images. So let me go back to our menu, settings, and style. And I'm just going to quickly change these back so that we can see it nice and clearly as we go through the rest of the training. So I just changed my background color again. But the button images down here. So show button images is default set to be enabled. So as we can see on my slide, all of my pictures are showing on my button with the word that I want to speak. So my drink has a cup, my milk has the milk carton, etc. If I turn that off, now it just becomes a page of all words. Some of my young adult users or adult users turn those button images off because they feel like it looks a little bit juvenile to have those pictures showing, so they can turn them off really easily. So we just talked about the reason why we might want to have those icons not on. The next thing that we can turn on or off is the speech, having the icon show up in our speech display bar. So let me go back to my menu and settings and style. I'm going to turn my button images back on. And then let's talk about how, if we want our speech display icons to show in our speech display bar. Now, this is generally turned off on the default devices, but you can just click to enable it. And we'll see now that I have it turned on, all of the pictures on my buttons are showing up in my speech display bar. There's a couple different reasons you might want to use this. Some teams use it as another visual support, I've heard, that to let the child know that they have really picked a device. A word, excuse me, not a device, so that they've said that word. It's just another visual support to help match that word. I've had another team of users. The young man was hard of hearing, was deaf, and he did not use sign language. And so he communicated to others with his device, and the way people communicated to him, because he was not yet reading, was they also put the instructions on his device. So they said, stop that, or, go outside. And then he could read the icons to understand what people were saying with him. I've had some teams or some people choose to use it to support literacy. I just like to talk about and mention that the research that we have currently that's coming out is saying that that does not actually help support literacy, having the icons match the words. So I always caution teams, if that's the only reason we're using it, it might be distracting because that's what the research is showing us, and it might not be serving your purpose. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'll go back into my menu and settings. I'm going to quickly turn those icons off, and then we'll talk about our menu lock. So we are back to our main menu page, and we have our menu lock. When you go into menu lock, you just need to check to enable it, and it will prompt you to set up a password. Now, your password does not have to be a certain number of characters. It doesn't have to have any special characters. It can be whatever you want. So I have some teams, we just want it to be something that the device users cannot figure out. So some parents choose to use birthdays and they just pick all numbers. So if they were born on January 2nd, 2009, the password would be 1209. Or something like that. For now, I'm just going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll do the same thing, confirm my password, and when I save it, and I come out of my menu, all the way back to my vocabulary, now that lock feature is available as the last option in my menu bar. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and lock it. And the reason we want to turn on menu lock for most kids is because it's really, really easy to get into the device. And we saw, just pushing that menu button, we can go into edit mode. We can make changes to our device settings. We could change the vocabulary. I had a client, I went to a training once, and they had renamed the vocabulary. I don't know what Haley did, because Haley had gone in and erased all of the buttons in her vocabulary, like every single one. It was just a blank page with no buttons on it. So we definitely went in and we set up that menu lock. So when you do want to unlock your menu, you just hit that unlock button and it's going to prompt you to put in your password. Okay, so I would put in 1, 2, 3, 4. And it will ask me if I want to disable kiosk mode. Now, kiosk mode, we're going to talk about in a few slides what kiosk mode is. And I generally tell teams, once we have kiosk mode set up, we don't need to play with it. We don't need to keep locking and unlocking it. So if we're just trying to make changes to our device, we don't need to unlock kiosk. So I tell them to say no. And again, we'll talk about what kiosk mode is in a little bit. So that you understand why I say that. I do quickly want to mention that there is an override password. So I just locked my menu again. And if I go to unlock and I forget the password for whatever reason, that password is going to be Bosco. No exclamation point, but it's Bosco in all caps. So if I put in BOSCO and then hit OK, I do get a little prompt saying that using this password is going to reset that previous password. Do you want to continue? And if I really can't remember what my password is and I just want to go ahead and reset it, you go ahead and hit yes. And again, I don't want to change or mess with my kiosk mode, so I'm going to leave that locked. Okay, Word Finder. Word Finder is a great feature to add to your menu. So you go to Menu and Settings, and then Word Finder is its own little category, and you just want to go ahead and click to enable it. And what this will let you do is, if we come back out to our vocabulary and I go to my menu, now I have Word Finder enabled. And when I go into my Word Finder, I can type in a word, as my slide says here, any word that I want, and it's going to show me the buttons that I need to push to get there, which is great, especially when we're first getting started with our devices. Now, if you search for a word and you can't find a word, it doesn't bring up any pathway to get to that word, that means that it doesn't live in the vocabulary. It doesn't exist. And so you need to add that word somewhere in the vocabulary, and you can make that decision on where you want to put that word. So let's go back and we'll talk about the flip interval. And the reason that's important is because if you are locking your menu, we don't want to have to lock and unlock every time that we want to find a word, but instead we can use our keyboard to find a word. And it's going to show up here in our speech display bar. And the flip interval, so let me go into my settings and my word finder, is how long that's going to stay in that each pathway. If there's more than one pathway, that's how long it's going to stay in the speech display bar. So you can set it anywhere, I think up to like 10 seconds, but I think 5 or 6 seconds is good. So let's leave it at 6 and I'll show you what that looks like. And so here's, you can see on the slide. Now, when you're looking for a word in your keyboard, it has to be the only thing in your speech display bar. You can't look for multiple words. So if
F-A-S-T.
If I want to look for the word fast, I'm going to go ahead and type it in, and then I'm going to hit this Find Word button. And there it is showing up here that I go to describe and then fast. Okay, it actually says a caution. I don't need to go to colors first. Describe is right there. So that is a little bit of a bug that we are working on and hopefully will be out in one of our future updates. So just be aware of any of those little things that you see. Your Find Word button does live in different places and different vocabularies, so it might not always be down here in the corner. Sometimes it's up here. On my slide, it's showing it's over here in this left-hand corner, so just be aware that you have that option. Okay, let's talk about kiosk mode. Kiosk mode is probably the most confusing thing we'll talk about today. If I go to my menu and my settings, you find kiosk under the system. So there's kiosk mode, and not all devices have kiosk mode, as the slide says here. Only our devices that run Android 5 or newer software have this as a function. So that's going to be our devices that are NovaChat 8.25s and newer. The 10.3s, I believe, and newer will have kiosk mode. If you don't have kiosk mode, then you're going to have to manually update your devices, which means you download the update from our website, you connect your computer to your device, and it's a lot of steps. But if you have kiosk mode, you can go into kiosk mode and turn it off, disable it. It is default turned on. Okay, and so when I disable it, now when I push my home button, so that actual physical button, it brings me out of my chat software. Okay, now if your device has not been unlocked, you will not see the apps and things like that. Like you will still just have access to your NovaChat, and then you will have settings up here so that you can go into your device settings. So you would go into settings and you can connect to Wi-Fi. Okay, and that's really important to be able to update your device. So that's, if you connect it to your Wi-Fi, every time your device comes back home, similar to like our cell phones, the device will reconnect to Wi-Fi, and then it will automatically search for any updates and download and install those updates. I think it searches like every night at midnight or something like that. So I tell parents, when you first get your device, you go home, you take it out of kiosk mode, you hook it up to your Wi-Fi. Then you go back into your software, you turn your kiosk back on, and then as long as you don't change your router or your password or anything else like that, you will not have to mess around with kiosk mode anymore. So like if you're unlocking that menu, nothing has changed. We don't need to unlock kiosk mode. And when we're in kiosk mode, no matter how many times I push that button, I am locked into my device as being used as a communication device only. Okay. Now, if you did think that your client or your child was super savvy and you wanted to have a separate password for your lock menu and your kiosk, you just need to disable it, and then you're going to set your password first. Again, no special characters are needed or length. You can be whatever you want. You set that password first, and then you enable kiosk mode. And so now there's a separate password every time you want to come out of kiosk mode. It prompts you to put in that password. And again, if you forget the password, your override is Bazinga. So a lot of our tech guys are Big Bang fans. So that's going to be the override password if you forgot your kiosk password. Okay. Data logging. So data logging is something I just quickly want to mention because it is in our system settings there. It's our very last option in the menu. And I want to just make you aware of what it is. So data logging, when you have it enabled, it will take a record of which buttons are pressed, when they're pressed, and what messages or what words are generated. It can be a really great way to see how the device is being used, how often it's being used, what's being said, and you can use it with some different features. So there is a full training on Realize language and data logging called More Than Just a Pretty Chart, Realizing the Power of Data Logging. That's an upcoming training. I would suggest if you want more information about data logging, you go there because that's an hour training that shows you all the things you can do with data logging and how you can use that information to help guide your goals and what you need to work on next. But I will quickly just say, you can connect to Realize Language, which is a website that it will send all of your information to Realize. You do have to pay $9.99 for a year subscription, but you can have 10 clients on one subscription. And it will give you these nice pretty graphs and charts showing you, like I said, when the device was being used and what was being said. If you don't want to do that though, you can always save that data to a file, download it to your computer and open it with Microsoft Window. You'll get like a timestamp and what was said. You can clear the log, because if you have it turned on, it's constantly taking data, and then you can set a privacy password. I just want to mention, if you have data logging turned on, you will know that your data logging is turned on when you're in your vocabulary. If you see this little graph in your speech display bar, that means your data logging is turned on. A couple more system settings, and then we will move into our editing at the end of the training here. So these are things that, again, I just go in and I change on all the devices. So I go into my system and my display settings. My brightness, you can toggle how bright you want it to be, or you can set it to be automatic brightness, and it will use that sensor on the device to adjust. But I do want to mention, if you're in full sunlight, if you're outside, you want to turn your brightness all the way up so that you can see your buttons. And then the other thing I change is the screen timeout. So it's default set to be set on 2 minutes. That's just not long enough, in my opinion. We're constantly hitting the home button and waking up the device. So I have my device set to wake up every 10 minutes, or to go to sleep after 10 minutes of no activity. If we're in a conversation, 2 minutes is nothing. So we wanted our words to always be available. So I always say at a minimum 10 minutes. A lot of my teams are using 30 minutes or sometimes even an hour. So I always change that on all of the devices. Okay, so with the last few minutes here, we're going to talk about the basic customizations that you can make in edit mode. But first, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of how to select a vocabulary and how to go through that process. So let me brighten this screen back up, and I'm going to show you how to do that. If you go into your menu, and then you go to Library, you will be taken to this page where all of the vocabulary files are listed in this scrolling list, okay? As I mentioned earlier, there are over 30 vocabulary files that are standard on all of our devices. And they go from sentence vocabularies up to core word vocabularies. The most popular files that we use are going to be the word power files. Those are our core word-based files. And you might see on your device, so like some of these devices, vocabularies say basic scan PCS and then basic scan SS. These two files are the exact same. The only way that they differ is this file is using Symbol Sticks pictures and this file is using Boardmaker pictures. Default is the symbol sticks, so that those vocabularies are available on all of our devices. If the SLP recommended PCS symbols at the time of purchase, then you will see PCS symbols, those Boardmaker symbols available as well. Okay, before you can make any changes to a vocabulary file, you're going to have to make a copy of the file. So you'll see these locks next to all of the vocabulary files. That means that those are original files and they can't be changed. So in order to copy a file, you're just going to scroll down to the one that you want to use, and we've been using WordPower 60 Basic today. So I'm going to scroll down to where I am. I'm just going to push and hold my WordPower 60 Basic, and then I get that little pop-up menu that asks me if I want to open this file or if I want to duplicate this file. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the file. And what you want to do then is you want to give your file an original name. I recommend that you keep the WordPower 60 Basic SS, because if you ever have to call tech support, they're going to ask you what file are you working on, and if you just name it Courtney or your child's name or something like that, you might not remember that it was this type of file to begin with. So I recommend you keep this and we erase the copy. Now I'm going to go ahead and put Courtney in there. You can put a full name, you can put first and last name, you can put initials, however you want to identify your files. And then you're just going to go ahead and hit save. And that file now shows up in my list of available files in my device. So I'm going to go ahead and click it, and I'm then going to select open so that I can go in and edit my file. To edit any file, all you have to do is go into your menu and then select edit mode. So you can see that that turns green. That edit mode box turns green, and then you also get these red words on the bottom of the screen letting you know that you're in edit mode and you're currently able to make changes. So it tells you you're in edit mode, it tells you the vocabulary file that you're currently editing, and then at the bottom here in the brackets, and this is going to be important next week when we talk about importing pages and connecting pages, it tells you the name of the page here in the bottom brackets. So that will always change. So now I'm on the social page. Okay, now I'm on the personal and questions page. And then the process to edit a button is to navigate to that button. So I am going to go ahead and change some of these social things. So I just navigated, I went social, personal questions, and then you're going to press and hold the button that you want to change. So I'm going to change this My Name button, and we'll see that, and I'm going to make this a little darker so you can see, and we'll kind of keep it here as we go back and forth, that my first option is edit button. So when I go into edit a button, it takes me to this page. So edit button. And there's a lot of things that I can change. So the label are the words that appear on the button, my name, and the message is what the button says. And you can change that separately from the label. Whenever you're creating a new button or you're editing the label, that's going to pre-populate into the message, but you go ahead and you want to change that. So I'll go ahead and add my name is Courtney. And I always like to model, capitalization and punctuation is good for literacy support. And then I can change the button image. Okay, so I can take a picture on the camera. There's a front-facing and a rear-facing camera. You're not really going to be able to see it because it's looking at my desk right now. Yeah, you can kind of see the crack in my desk. Or if I turn my camera around to be that front-facing camera, it's showing you my document camera now. So you can just use that to take a picture, or you can always find the image that you want. So if I find a picture of a woman and search, I can then pick whichever one that I want, and that will be saved onto my button. The next tab of things that you can change is going to be the style of your button. So this will really change how your button looks. You can change the font, you can change the font size, you can make it bold, italic, or underlined, and then you can change the color. So if I change the body, that will be the background of my button. I can change my font color, or I can change the border. So that's what we see on the slide here, is that it can be a really good visual highlight. So if I change my font color to be something super bright, and then I also make my border width a lot bigger, it's going to change how my button looks from the rest of my buttons. So if I'm working on introducing myself and saying my name, it gives me a nice visual cue. The last tab on the top is the button action. Now the button action is what makes, there's a whole host of button actions in this drop-down box. Most people will choose like navigate or visit as the most popular button actions. That's something we're going to talk about next week, but there's a whole host of things that you can make a button do. So I'm going to go ahead and save my changes, and we can see now that I have this nice orange bright highlight, and if I click it,
My name is Courtney.
it says my name is Courtney and all of my changes are saved. Some of the other things we can do to edit a button is you can copy and paste a button. So if I just push and hold that button, you see that I can copy my button, and then I could, if I wanted to, on this blank button over here, push and hold and paste my button. So now I have two buttons saying my name is Courtney. The copy and paste button style is a nice feature. So let's say we are done working on introducing ourselves, and now I just want that button to look like all my other buttons on the page. A really quick way to do that, instead of going into edit mode and making all those changes, you copy a button that you want it to look like. So you copy that button, and then instead I go back to the button I want to change. I don't want to paste it because I don't want to I live buttons or whatever I picked, but you paste the button style, because remember that was the tab where we changed how the button looks. So now it will look like all of my other buttons. Another really important reason that you want to put your menu lock on is because it's so easy to go into edit mode. We just have to hit menu and then edit mode. And it's easy to drag and drop these buttons across this page, and they just flip and swap with each other. And we don't want that. We always want our words in the same place so we can take advantage of some motor planning. So that's just another reason why we might want to put that menu lock on. But it is really easy. You can certainly go in and change where buttons are, but just don't continually change where the buttons are. You know, once you move it to one place, leave it in that place. We don't want to move buttons around on the pages all the time, but you can initially. You can change the button size as well. So in that menu, you can go ahead and change button size. So I'm just going to make it 2 vertical cells, and we can see now it's nice and long. And then the last thing I'll talk about is this use same button. So with the use same button, I'm going to quickly just show you. It can be nice for teams. So sometimes we like to, for information that changes, you might want to use the same button. So like in the school, if they, during calendar time, like to state how old they are, well, there's a calendar time in the vocabulary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this button. I'm going to navigate to my school and my calendar page, and I'm going to use my same button. And what that does,
I am 10 years old.
so it says I'm 10 years old, but then when my birthday comes around and I go in and I make those changes because now I'm 11, because I'm using the same button on 2 pages, I only have to make those changes one place. So I changed it here, but it also changed on my social page.
I am 11 years old.
So that's a nice little feature about use same button. Last thing, we have a couple minutes left, is going to be this hide mode. So when you go into hide mode, you will see when you're in edit mode, hide mode is an option on your menu bar. You have an option to hide all of your buttons. And so then you just go ahead and click the buttons that you want to show. And when you come out of edit mode, it shows you just those few buttons, okay? Now with the way word power vocabularies work, and because they're predictive, so I'm going to hide all my buttons and then just pick a few of them. It can be a lot of work to use hide mode, because what happens when I select I, it takes me to my next page. So I have to go through all of the pages of my vocabulary, and just to show you, this is how many pages live in the vocabulary. So it can be a really useful feature if you want to, if you have a limited amount of time and you really want to focus on some words, but you really are going to have to put a little bit of work into going through all the pages to make sure that only what you want to show is hiding, or what you want to show is showing, and everything else is hidden. I will say, because I didn't mention this earlier, with any of those edits, you definitely want to have a plan, okay? Because there is no undo button. So when you make these changes, you have to go in and physically do the work to put those things back. So if I wanted to change my foods, excuse me. If I wanted to change my foods and
eat,
take peanut butter off and put something else on, but later I want peanut butter back, I would have to go through all of those steps to put peanut butter on a different button or that button. There's no undo. So always have a plan for what you want to edit. So toys, foods, personal information, those are all great places to start. And it is just now 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up today. Next week, we're going to go through the website tour to show you where you can get some implementation resources and other materials. And I will stay on for a few minutes if anybody has any questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for being on with us today. Remember, if you want the ASHA credit, to submit your participation form within 15 days and put the training date, today's date of training, on there. And thank you.